The small room was warm and buzzing with quiet chatter. People had gathered in what seemed like a casual setting, friends and strangers mingling over light drinks and soft laughter. At one corner of the room, a sleek black piano stood under a simple lamp, its polished surface reflecting the dim light. Everyone assumed it was just background music. The host had said she would play something light, easy, just simple tones to fill the air while people enjoyed themselves. No one was prepared for what was about to happen. She walked in slowly, her posture relaxed, almost shy. There was no sign of a performer ready to dazzle a crowd. She was quiet, dressed simply, with her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. People glanced her way with polite curiosity, some raising an eyebrow, others exchanging small smiles. No one expected her to do more than the usual casual play. Yet there was a calm confidence in her movements, the kind that only comes from knowing your own strength without needing to prove it. As she sat at the piano, her fingers hovered above the keys, delicate and light. There was a faint murmur in the room, a mixture of interest and mild skepticism. She didn't speak. She didn't announce what she would play. Instead, she let her fingers settle, taking a quiet moment, and then began. The first notes were soft, almost tentative, as if testing the air. They were simple, melodic, familiar. People leaned back in their chairs, chatting lightly, sipping drinks, thinking it was just a gentle start to a casual evening. But even in those first simple tones, there was something different. A subtle clarity, a perfect timing, a softness that somehow drew attention without demanding it. It was easy to miss if you weren't paying close attention, but those who did notice felt a small pause in their thoughts, a tiny shiver of recognition that this was not ordinary. The conversation continued in pockets of the room, yet slowly, the murmurs began to fade. One person stopped mid-sentence, listening more closely. Another lifted their glass and stared at the keys, mesmerized by the sound. Even in its simplicity, the music held a kind of invisible gravity, pulling focus gently but firmly. People were beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be as simple as they had thought. She moved gracefully through the notes, her hands flowing effortlessly, almost dancing across the keys. Each tone was clean, precise, and yet carried a hint of warmth, a human touch that seemed to reach beyond the instrument itself. No one could quite place why, but the room felt different. There was a subtle hush that had settled over the gathering, an unspoken acknowledgement that what was happening was unusual, special even, in a quiet, understated way. She glanced briefly at the people watching, her eyes calm, almost unreadable, and then returned to the piano. There was no showmanship, no exaggerated movements, just pure, unassuming focus. It was easy to mistake her demeanor for shyness, but there was power in the way she held herself, in the quiet command of the space around her. It was a strange mix of humility and mastery, and it drew people in without any effort at all. Some of the audience began to notice the subtle patterns in the music. There were small flourishes, tiny shifts that hinted at skill far beyond casual play. A chord would linger slightly longer. A note would resolve in an unexpected but beautiful way. The simplicity of the opening had been a camouflage, masking a depth that was only slowly revealing itself. Eyes widened, heads turned, and whispers started to ripple through the crowd. One person leaned forward and whispered to another, asking softly if they noticed the change, if the music felt somehow alive. She didn't react to the whispers or the glances. She was immersed in the piano, her fingers following a rhythm that seemed both natural and instinctive. The sound filled the room evenly, wrapping around every listener, connecting them to the music without words. People found themselves holding their breath at times, caught up in moments of unexpected beauty. Some sat forward, as if trying to absorb every note, while others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Time seemed to shift in the room. The casual chatter had faded entirely, replaced by a silent attentiveness. People who had arrived expecting small talk and light entertainment found themselves drawn into something deeper. The music was simple, yes, in its structure at first, but it carried an emotional weight that was impossible to ignore. Every note seemed deliberate, every pause meaningful, and yet it all flowed with the natural ease of someone completely at home in their own world. The host, standing nearby, watched with a mixture of pride and astonishment. She had expected a pleasant background performance, something that would make the evening feel complete without taking center stage. Instead, the room was transformed. Guests were leaning forward, their eyes on the piano, their expressions caught between disbelief and admiration. There was a sense of collective realization that they were witnessing something rare, something that could not be planned or predicted. She continued to play, her body relaxed, but her mind focused. Each note was precise, each movement intentional. Yet there was a softness, a human touch that made the technical skill invisible. It was as if the piano itself were an extension of her thoughts, translating feelings and subtle emotions into sound. People felt it in their chest, in their hearts, even without knowing why. It was intimate, personal, and yet shared by everyone in the room at the same time. Occasionally, she would pause, not for applause, not for recognition, but to breathe, to feel the space, to connect again with the music. Those pauses were small but powerful, moments that held a certain tension and anticipation. The room seemed to hold its breath along with her, waiting for the next note, the next delicate movement. Every person was aware of the quiet transformation happening before them, a shift from casual expectation to genuine wonder. A few people started to exchange glances, trying to communicate their astonishment without breaking the spell. Eyebrows raised, eyes widened, hands subtly gripping chairs or cups. Some had tears welling quietly, moved by the purity and unexpected depth of the music. It was a shared experience, unspoken, a quiet bond forming in the space between the notes. The simple tones had become a bridge to something extraordinary. She didn't notice the audience's reactions. She was entirely in the moment, her focus absolute. And that was the secret. The simplicity at first had lulled everyone into comfort, but her true skill had begun to emerge quietly, naturally, without fanfare. It was the contrast that made the performance unforgettable. The journey from calm simplicity to subtle complexity, from background music to captivating presence. As the final notes of the opening piece lingered and faded, the room remained still. No one moved immediately. No one spoke. The air itself seemed suspended in recognition of what had just happened. It was a moment of collective pause, an acknowledgement that expectations had been completely surpassed. The simple tones had done more than entertain. They had announced a talent that demanded attention, quietly but undeniably. And in that quiet, unassuming corner, she lifted her hands from the keys, glanced briefly at the audience, and allowed a small, humble smile. There was no arrogance, no need for applause, no demand for recognition. The performance was not about proving anything. It was about sharing, connecting, and letting the music speak for itself. And already, the people who had come expecting casual entertainment were realizing that they had witnessed the beginning of something unforgettable. The room had settled into a quiet stillness, the kind that comes when everyone is aware that something rare is happening. The audience sat in a shared sense of curiosity and wonder. No one moved, no one whispered. The young woman at the piano had ended her opening piece, but the echo of the notes still lingered, filling the air with a subtle tension, as if inviting the next sound to speak even louder than before. She looked around the room briefly, scanning the faces without really searching for anyone in particular. Her expression remained calm, almost as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Yet there was an intensity in her eyes that spoke to her complete connection with the music. The audience could feel it. They sensed that what came next would be different, though they did not yet know how extraordinary it would become. Then, without warning, she began again. The first few notes were familiar, soft, and gentle, much like before. But there was a subtle shift in the rhythm, a slight hesitation, a delicate tension woven between each key. It was a rhythm that seemed to speak in whispers at first, drawing listeners in closer without them realizing. People leaned forward slightly, unconsciously, as if trying to catch the first sparks of a secret being told only through music. The music began to grow, slowly, imperceptibly. It moved from the simple and familiar into something more intricate, layered, and complex. Tiny flourishes appeared between the notes, delicate embellishments that revealed a level of skill and intuition that no one had expected. Some of the audience's eyes widened. A few people exchanged glances, silent acknowledgement passing between them that this was no longer just background music. Something extraordinary was unfolding. Each chord she played seemed to ripple through the room, affecting people differently. Some felt a deep emotional tug, a memory or feeling stirred without words. Others were fascinated by the technical precision, by the fluidity and control in her hands that made every note seem both effortless and deliberate. Every key she pressed seemed to carry purpose, a message, and the room was hanging on each one. She moved with an ease that was mesmerizing, her body in perfect harmony with the piano. There was no hurry, no rush to impress. She played as if she was speaking a language only she fully understood, yet everyone could feel the meaning. The audience was drawn deeper into the performance, completely absorbed. Even the casual observers who had arrived expecting light music found themselves caught in the spell. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation, almost vibrating with the energy of the unfolding performance. There was a particular moment when she shifted completely from the gentle, melodic introduction to a passage that was unexpectedly bold and passionate. The contrast was startling. The soft tones had lulled the audience into a sense of comfort, and now she was showing them something entirely different, an intensity and mastery that left people breathless. Hands that had been relaxed on laps now tightened into fists in awe. Eyes that had been casually observing were now wide, unblinking, completely focused. Even in the room's silence, one could sense movement. People unconsciously leaned toward the piano, a collective response to the magnetic pull of her music. Each note seemed to demand attention, each chord carrying weight beyond its sound. The melody swirled through the room, weaving itself into the listener's consciousness, leaving them suspended between reality and the world the music created. She allowed herself tiny pauses, but they were not empty. Each pause carried meaning, a tension that made the next note even more powerful. The audience felt the unspoken rhythm, the ebb and flow of emotion that guided the performance. It was like a story being told, but without words, just music, raw and pure, and the silence that amplified it. People held their breath, not wanting to interrupt the fragile magic, not wanting to break the spell. The young woman's face was serene, almost meditative, but there was an unmistakable intensity in her eyes, a sign of the focus and control required to navigate the complex layers of sound she was creating. The music was no longer simple tones. It had transformed into something alive, almost tangible. Each person in the room experienced it in their own way. Some felt joy, some nostalgia, others a quiet sadness or awe. It was deeply personal, yet shared by everyone in the same space. Occasionally, she would glance down at the keys as if consulting with them silently, her fingers tracing patterns that seemed both deliberate and inspired. Her movements were precise, yet they flowed with a natural grace that made the technical brilliance almost invisible. The complexity of what she was doing was evident only to those who listened closely, yet everyone felt its effect, like a wave passing through the room. The audience's reactions were subtle but noticeable. One person whispered softly to another, unable to contain their admiration. Someone else closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them completely. A few people sat rigid, captivated, not wanting to miss a single note. Even the casual observers, who had initially considered this performance merely a pleasant background, were now fully present, their attention entirely consumed. As she continued, the music grew in depth and emotion. She layered sounds, intertwined melodies, and added unexpected pauses that made the piece almost conversational. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of her thoughts, her feelings, her very being. The room seemed to transform around her, shifting from a casual gathering to a space suspended in time, existing solely for the music. Every so often, she would shift the tempo, subtly changing the rhythm, catching the audience off guard. These changes were not abrupt but perfectly integrated, creating an effect that was both surprising and exhilarating. Listeners leaned in, craning their necks slightly, sensing that something remarkable was taking place. something that defied the casual expectations they had arrived with. She was completely absorbed in her performance, unaware of the impact she was having. It was not a performance for applause or recognition. It was a conversation between her and the piano, with the audience as silent witnesses. The sincerity of her connection to the music added to its power, making every note resonate deeply with those listening. There was a particular section where she played a series of delicate, intricate notes that seemed almost impossible to perform. Yet she did it with ease, making the impossible appear natural. The audience felt a collective sense of astonishment. It was a rare combination of skill, intuition, and emotional expression that few had the privilege of witnessing. People could not help but lean forward, silently urging her to continue, eager to experience the next moment of brilliance. Even as the music reached more complex passages, the beauty of the simplicity she had begun with was never lost. The contrast between the initial gentle tones and the intricate sections that followed created a dynamic tension that held everyone's attention. It was as if the music itself was telling a story, unfolding slowly, revealing depth and character as it progressed. As the piece progressed, she allowed herself small flourishes, moments of spontaneity that demonstrated her comfort and mastery. These were not excessive or showy. They were natural extensions of the music, small surprises that added richness and texture. Each flourish was a reminder that what the audience was hearing was alive, evolving, and uniquely hers. The room remained completely still, each person captivated in their own way. The music spoke to them individually while connecting them collectively. It was a rare moment of shared human experience, a testament to the power of art to transcend words, to evoke feelings and thoughts that could not be expressed otherwise. As the final notes of this part of the performance lingered, fading softly into silence, there was a moment where no one moved. The room held its breath, caught in the delicate aftermath of the music. It was a pause filled with recognition, the unspoken acknowledgement that they had witnessed a talent far beyond their expectations. The young woman's hands rested lightly on the keys, and she allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, aware that she had captivated the room without a single word. The silence was profound. It was not the absence of sound, but a presence of awe, a quiet that demanded respect. People exchanged glances, sharing a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and excitement. Even those who had doubted or underestimated her realized they were in the presence of something exceptional. The simple tones had evolved, revealing layers of skill, emotion, and artistry that left the room frozen in appreciation. She remained at the piano, not moving, not speaking, simply existing in the space she had created with her music. The audience, still in awe, began to understand that what they had experienced was just the beginning. There was more to come, more revelations waiting in the next sequence of notes, more depth and mastery to unfold. The room was charged with anticipation, silently urging her to continue, ready to be moved again by the magic she was creating. The room was no longer just a gathering space. It had become something almost sacred. People who had come expecting a light performance were now caught in the middle of a musical journey they could never have imagined. The young woman at the piano had begun to move beyond the gentle, measured tones of the opening pieces. Her hands danced across the keys with precision, but each movement carried a depth of feeling that was impossible to ignore. As she played, the music began to shift in ways that surprised the audience. What had started as a soft, comforting melody now carried sudden bursts of emotion. Notes that leapt and fell, whispers and shouts in harmony. The rhythm became unpredictable, yet perfectly balanced, a reflection of someone completely immersed in their own world while inviting everyone else to follow. The audience felt their breaths caught, their hearts racing with the unfolding complexity. There was a noticeable change in the atmosphere. The soft murmurs of conversation had disappeared entirely. Even those who had been distracted moments before now sat fully alert, their attention glued to the piano. Some faces showed wide-eyed astonishment. Others had expressions of quiet reverence, like they were witnessing something beyond explanation. The room itself seemed to vibrate with the music, each chord sending ripples through the air, touching every person differently yet connecting them all. She shifted seamlessly from one style to another, moving between delicate, almost fragile sequences and bold, commanding passages that demanded attention. The contrast was electric. The audience realized they were no longer just hearing music, they were experiencing it, living it alongside her. A simple tone had become a narrative, a story without words, with highs and lows, tension and release, and emotions that could not be described by language alone. A few people tried to whisper to one another, but the spell of the moment made even words seem inadequate. They could only watch, listen, and feel. Her fingers moved so effortlessly. It was as if the piano had become an extension of herself. Each note seemed intentional yet free, precise yet fluid. The audience was mesmerized, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, letting the sound carry them away. The effect was profound, almost magnetic. Midway through the performance, she introduced a sequence of notes that were so unexpected, so full of emotion, that it felt like the room itself had stopped breathing. There was a sudden intensity in the music that captured everyone completely. It was not just skill that impressed. It was the raw honesty, the way she allowed herself to be vulnerable and human through her instrument. Every person in the room felt a personal connection, though they couldn't explain why. Some felt joy, others a sudden ache of memory or longing, all united by the sound that seemed to speak directly to the soul. The young woman's focus never wavered. She was not performing for recognition or applause. She was completely absorbed in the music, and that authenticity made it even more powerful. People felt the sincerity in every note, the truth in every pause. Even the most skeptical observers could not deny the effect it had on them. It was impossible not to be affected when the music was so alive, so fully present, and so deeply human. As the piece progressed, she introduced subtle layers, harmonies that were almost invisible yet created a richness that the audience could feel without fully understanding. The complexity grew, not for show, but because it was the natural unfolding of the music in her hands. The room seemed to expand, each listener held in the invisible embrace of her performance. Every change in tempo, every variation in volume, every pause and flourish contributed to a growing sense of awe. Occasionally, she would glance up briefly, just enough to connect with the audience without breaking the flow. Those fleeting moments were like a silent acknowledgement, a reminder that this was a shared experience. People felt that connection deeply, a subtle bond forming between performer and listeners, between individuals in the room who were now part of something extraordinary together. There was one particular moment when the music reached a peak of intensity, a rapid cascade of notes that seemed almost impossible to play. Fingers flew over the keys with a speed and precision that left the audience breathless. Some clutched their chairs, others held their hands over their hearts. It was as if time itself had slowed, allowing everyone to witness the pinnacle of skill and emotion simultaneously. The simple tones that had started the evening had blossomed into a performance that was both awe-inspiring and deeply moving. The transitions were seamless. She would pull back from the intensity, slipping into softer, more contemplative passages, allowing the audience to recover, to breathe, and to reflect. These moments of calm were no less powerful. In their quietness, they amplified the next surge of emotion, creating a rhythm that kept the audience on edge, fully engaged, unable to predict what would come next. People were aware of their own reactions. A tear escaped down someone's cheek. Another's jaw tightened in amazement. Some were silent, their eyes closed, completely absorbed. A few held their breath, waiting for the next note, afraid to disturb the fragile magic that hung in the air. It was an unusual kind of attention, a collective focus that was rare in everyday life, yet natural in the presence of something extraordinary. The music began to weave in subtle themes, patterns that repeated with variations, giving the audience a sense of familiarity while still surprising them. It was a masterful blend of anticipation and revelation, a conversation between the performer and her instrument that the audience could feel but not fully decipher. Each listener experienced it uniquely, yet all were united in their admiration and wonder. The energy in the room was palpable. Even those who had come in with casual expectations were now fully invested. They were aware of the skill, yes, but even more so of the humanity behind it, the expression, the honesty, the vulnerability. Every note told a story, every pause spoke of intention, and every flourish reflected a mind fully present in the moment. People were not just watching. They were witnessing a transformation, both of the room and of themselves. As the climax approached, the music grew richer, fuller, more demanding. She played with a combination of precision and abandon, each note a deliberate choice yet free in its expression. The audience could feel the tension and release, the ebb and flow of the performance as if it were a living, breathing entity. There was a collective awareness that this was the turning point, the moment where the simple expectation of background music had completely vanished, replaced by something monumental. Her hands moved with a life of their own, guided by instinct, experience, and emotion. The complexity increased, yet the music never lost its emotional clarity. Each listener could interpret it in their own way, yet all were affected. Some were moved to tears, others to quiet awe, and a few simply sat frozen, unable to process the beauty unfolding before them. It was a shared experience that transcended words, a testament to the power of music to communicate in ways language cannot. Even as she reached the crescendo, she maintained a balance between control and freedom, mastery and spontaneity. The audience could feel both the effort and the ease, the labor and the joy, all intertwined in a performance that was alive with authenticity. The young woman's connection to the piano was complete, and the audience could sense it with every note. As the final surge of emotion began to taper, she allowed the notes to settle, softening them gradually, returning to a calm and reflective space. The room exhaled collectively, the spell broken only slightly, leaving everyone with a sense of profound satisfaction and wonder. People were breathing again, whispering softly, exchanging glances, some laughing quietly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. They had been transformed just a little by what they had witnessed. She lifted her hands slowly from the keys, not in triumph, but in gentle acknowledgement. The audience sat in stunned silence for a few moments, reluctant to break the fragile aura of awe. Then, gradually, the room began to hum with whispered admiration, quiet clapping, and expressions of astonishment. It was the aftermath of a turning point, the moment when simple expectations had been replaced by the reality of extraordinary talent. Everyone present knew they had experienced something rare and unforgettable, and the room seemed charged with anticipation for what would come next. The room had grown completely silent. The earlier whispers, the quiet shuffling of feet, even the soft clinking of glasses had vanished. Every person was focused entirely on the young woman at the piano. She had moved beyond anything the audience had anticipated, taking the music to heights that felt both impossible and entirely natural. The simple tones that had begun the evening were gone, replaced by a symphony of emotion that filled every corner of the space. She leaned into the keys slightly, her posture relaxed yet purposeful. Her fingers moved with a fluidity that was mesmerizing, each note precise yet flowing, deliberate yet spontaneous. The audience was frozen, unable to look away, unable to breathe normally, as if the sound had suspended time itself. People who had been talking or distracted just moments before were now fully present, caught in the magic of her performance. The piece she played now was bold and commanding. Rapid sequences of notes cascaded from her hands, weaving intricate patterns that seemed almost too complex for a human to execute. Yet she played with ease, and in that ease was the true power of the moment. The audience could feel the intensity, the emotion, the connection she had with every note. It was as if the piano was an extension of her soul, communicating in ways words never could. Every chord resonated through the room, vibrating in the air, in the chairs, in the hearts of those listening. There was a subtle harmony between the highs and lows, the loud and soft, the fast and slow. The audience felt it physically as much as emotionally. Some held their hands over their chests, some closed their eyes, letting the music penetrate every part of them. There was no distraction, no casual conversation, no wandering minds. Every person was completely absorbed. The young woman's movements became more expressive, yet still controlled. She leaned back slightly, then forward, following the rhythm of the music and the emotions it carried. The complexity increased, layering melodies and harmonies that intertwined seamlessly. It was as if she was telling a story, a narrative without words, yet everyone could understand it in their own way. Each person interpreted the music differently, but the impact was universal: awe and wonder. The audience began to realize that this was not a simple performance. This was a revelation. They were witnessing the full depth of talent, skill, and emotional connection in real time. Some felt tears prick their eyes, moved by the sheer beauty and power of what they were hearing. Others were silent, mouths slightly open, unable to form words to express what they felt. The energy in the room was palpable, a mixture of astonishment, admiration, and quiet reverence. There were moments when the music would suddenly shift, from intense, rapid sequences to soft, delicate passages that felt intimate and personal. These shifts were seamless, like a story unfolding chapter by chapter. The audience could sense the thought and feeling behind every change, every pause, every flourish. It was clear that the young woman was not performing for effect. She was performing for the truth of the music, for the pure expression of emotion and skill. At one point, she played a series of notes that were both complex and hauntingly beautiful. The harmony was intricate, the tempo varied unpredictably, yet it flowed naturally. People felt a chill run through them, a mixture of admiration and emotional resonance. The music seemed to speak directly to their hearts, evoking memories, feelings, and sensations they had long forgotten. It was deeply personal and yet shared by everyone in the room simultaneously. The climax of the performance began to build. The notes grew louder, more insistent, more commanding. Her hands moved faster, yet with perfect precision. The intensity was almost overwhelming, and the audience could feel it in their bodies. Some gripped their chairs, some leaned forward, others pressed their palms together. The piano was alive, the room was alive, and the music had become a force that no one could ignore. She did not look up or around the room. Her focus was absolute, her connection to the music total. It was clear that she was both leading and following, improvising within structure, expressing emotion while maintaining control. The audience sensed the mastery, the dedication, the understanding that had brought her to this moment. They were witnessing the culmination of years of practice, moments of doubt, flashes of inspiration, and endless patience, all coming together in real time. As the intensity reached its peak, she introduced subtle nuances, tiny variations in timing, delicate touches on the keys, pauses that seemed to hold the weight of entire sentences of feeling. These moments drew the listeners even deeper, making the climactic passages more powerful by contrast. Every note had a reason, every chord carried meaning, and the audience was completely enraptured. The crescendo seemed endless, yet perfectly controlled. She brought together all the elements she had used throughout the performance: the gentle beginnings, the intricate sequences, the emotional surges, the delicate pauses. It was a symphony contained within a single performance, an extraordinary blend of technical skill and human emotion. The room was filled with a sense of awe that was almost tangible, a collective awareness of witnessing something beyond ordinary experience. People were transfixed, some with tears streaming, some wide-eyed in astonishment. There was laughter and relief and joy, quiet gasps of surprise, soft murmurs of admiration, all interwoven with the music. The young woman continued to play, fully absorbed, giving everything to the moment. She was not aware of the effect she had on the audience. She was aware only of the music and her own expression through it. As the piece approached its conclusion, the intensity began to taper. The notes softened, the rhythms slowed, and the elaborate passages gave way to a calm, reflective melody. It was a gentle landing after the emotional journey, a moment for the audience to breathe, to absorb, to feel the lingering impact of what they had just experienced. Even in the quiet, there was a profound sense of fulfillment, a shared understanding that something extraordinary had just taken place. The final notes hung in the air, fading slowly, almost reluctantly. There was a pause, a stillness that felt complete and perfect. The audience sat frozen, holding on to the last echoes, not wanting to break the magic. It was a moment of pure admiration, a collective recognition of talent, emotion, and human expression at its highest. No words were spoken. None were needed. Then, gradually, the room began to move again. Soft applause started, tentative at first, then building as the audience released the awe and wonder they had been holding inside. People exchanged smiles, whispered quietly to each other, and some shook their heads in disbelief. They had come expecting simple tones, light background music, and instead, they had witnessed a performance that would stay with them for a lifetime. The young woman lifted her hands from the keys slowly, her expression calm and serene. There was no triumph, no demand for recognition, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had happened. The audience, still buzzing with emotion, clapped louder, some standing, some leaning forward, all united in their appreciation. The simple tones that had started the evening had become a moment of pure human connection, shared awe, and unforgettable artistry. The final note lingered in the room, fading slowly as if reluctant to leave. For a moment, there was complete silence, not a quiet born of emptiness, but one filled with awe and reflection. Every person in the room sat frozen, caught between disbelief and admiration. They had come expecting simple background music, pleasant and unobtrusive, and instead had been transported through a journey of emotion, skill, and expression that none would forget. The young woman lifted her hands from the keys gently, almost reverently. There was no rush, no need to bask in recognition, just a quiet moment of acknowledgement between herself, the piano, and the room that had been transformed. The audience could see the serenity in her face, the calm that comes from someone completely in their element. It was not pride that she showed, but the quiet satisfaction of sharing something profoundly personal and human. Gradually, people began to stir. A single clap echoed, hesitant but genuine, and it seemed to awaken everyone. Soon, applause filled the room, growing in intensity, voices overlapping in a chorus of appreciation. Some stood, some leaned forward, others wiped away tears. There was laughter, soft exclamations of surprise, whispered words of praise. The applause was not just for the technical skill, which was astonishing, but for the emotion, the vulnerability, and the honesty that had been laid bare through music. People began to talk among themselves, their words soft but full of excitement. They exchanged glances that said more than words could, a shared understanding that they had witnessed something rare. Memories of earlier performances or casual music experiences were compared, and everyone agreed, silently or aloud, that nothing had ever felt like this. The simple tones that had begun the evening had been the key, the gentle start that made the contrast of the full performance so striking, so unforgettable. Some audience members approached the piano, still in awe, wanting to see her closer, to witness the hands that had created such magic. Others lingered in their seats, overwhelmed by emotion, their hearts still beating in rhythm with the music. The energy in the room was electric but warm, a collective acknowledgement of something deeply human, something shared and meaningful. Everyone was changed, even in the smallest ways, by what they had experienced. The host of the gathering, who had initially planned for a simple, casual performance, now watched with pride and amazement. She realized that this was not just a talent display, it was a revelation. The young woman had not just played music. She had told a story, shared a piece of herself, and created a moment that would linger in memory long after the room emptied. The host felt gratitude, not just for the entertainment, but for the experience, for the reminder that talent and passion could surprise and inspire in ways no one could predict. People began to speak in hushed tones, recalling the moments that had moved them most. Someone mentioned the delicate sequence that had made them tear up. Another pointed out the unexpected surge of intensity that had sent chills down their spine. Everyone had their own highlights, but all agreed that the performance had transcended ordinary expectations. It was personal, yet collective, intimate, yet universally moving. The young woman did not rush to leave the piano. She remained seated, quiet, letting the audience absorb what had happened. She did not need to explain or justify the performance. The music had spoken for her, and its message was clear to anyone who had listened with attention. Some people approached to express thanks, offering words of praise that she accepted with gentle smiles, her humility matching the depth of her talent. She did not need recognition. The shared experience was enough. As the room slowly began to return to its casual atmosphere, people continued to reflect on what had just occurred. Drinks were picked up again, conversations restarted, but they were different now. There was a light in their eyes, a spark of wonder that lingered from the performance. People spoke quietly about what they had heard, the emotions it had stirred, the surprise at how a simple beginning could lead to something so extraordinary. It was a reminder that talent could hide in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The young woman eventually stood, closing the piano lid gently. There was no fanfare, no dramatic exit, just a calm departure that matched the humility she had shown throughout. People instinctively moved closer to express appreciation once more, some extending hands in congratulations, others offering warm smiles. She acknowledged everyone graciously, never breaking the sense of authenticity that had defined the performance from the beginning. As the audience began to leave, many lingered, unwilling to let go of the moment. They spoke softly among themselves, recounting favorite parts, sharing the emotional impact, and marveling at the unexpected depth of the performance. Even those who were typically casual observers or not particularly musical found themselves caught up in the shared experience, surprised at how deeply they had been affected. The impact of the performance continued even after the room emptied. People left talking, texting, calling friends, sharing the story of what they had witnessed. Some replayed the memory in their minds, savoring the sequence of notes, the flow of emotion, and the way the young woman had commanded attention without demanding it. The evening had begun with low expectations, but it ended with a shared recognition that something rare and beautiful had been experienced, a reminder of the power of dedication, passion, and authentic expression. The piano, now silent, seemed to carry the echoes of the performance, as if it remembered every note, every emotion, every subtle flourish. The young woman walked away, her steps quiet but purposeful, leaving behind a room still charged with the resonance of what had been played. The memory of the simple tones that had started the evening lingered, now transformed into a testament to skill, emotion, and the human capacity to surprise and inspire. In the following days, the audience carried the memory with them. Conversations revisited the performance, descriptions grew vivid, and admiration spread. Some listeners reflected on their own talents, inspired to pursue their passions more deeply. Others simply carried the emotional imprint, a reminder that even ordinary expectations could be shattered in the most beautiful ways. The young woman's performance had created a ripple effect, touching lives subtly yet profoundly, leaving a lasting impression that words could not fully capture. The evening had started with an expectation of simplicity, casual tones to fill the background. Instead, it had revealed extraordinary talent, emotional depth, and the quiet power of authenticity. The young woman had shared a part of herself through her music, leaving the audience frozen in awe, moved in ways they could not fully explain, and forever changed by what had been a single performance. The memory of the night, of the simple tones that transformed into something unforgettable, lingered in every mind, a quiet but powerful testament to the beauty of unexpected brilliance.